Do you have a favorite memory or story that you like to tell?
The war years. I was 14 years old when the war ended.
And it's World War II.
Yeah. I remember how patriotic everybody was. You know, everybody was for the war, and all the car plants were transferred into making tanks and planes. You couldn't get a new car. There was no new cars being made.
What's the funniest thing that you've been a part of?
At the time it wasn't so funny, but and we look back at it, it was. We lived in I told you when this neighborhood was small. Dan was less than 5. We let the kids play outdoors all day, and they come in for lunch and call. We just call and the kids would come in. But one day, a policeman came to my door, and he had Dan and his 2 little buddies with him in his car. And he said, somebody called and told us there were 3 little boys walking down the railroad track. And so I broke up with my boyfriend and was dating a lot of different guys. It was just so much fun. I can't tell you how much fun it was. That's the times I wasn't so close to the Lord.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another Kept interview. Today we have the special honor of talking to our great-grandmother, Joanne Vriesman. Can you just start off with a little bit of a synopsis of your life? Start with your childhood and tell us about how your childhood was.
I grew up, I lived in the same house since I was 3 months old until I got married. And I had a wonderful family, a Christian upbringing, and I'm always very thankful for that. And I felt loved and I felt confident, and I would say it was ideal. I went to high school and started college and got married when I was 19. We always knew each other. We grew up in the same church. Like kids in your church that you know, but you were not. He was not in my friendship group. We went to the same youth group and catechism and Sunday school, the same high school. And so we always knew each other, but we were never actual friends or hung out together, you might say. I had a steady boyfriend from the middle of 11th grade and all through 12th grade and that whole summer. And so I really didn't want to go away to school. So I registered in a community college. When I got there, there were 4 guys to every girl in that college because they were all coming back from the war. And so I broke up with my boyfriend and was dating a lot of different guys. It was just so much fun. I can't tell you how much fun it was. That's the times I wasn't so close to the Lord. But just having a lot of fun. My husband, when he got out of high school, went in the Army. There was a program there that he could go 1 year of active duty, and then he could be in the reserves, which is sort of like the National Guard, but for 6 years. So he was away while I was in my first semester of college. But he came home on a furlough, and I remember I was singing in the choir in church, and I saw him, and he had his uniform on, which I had never seen him, of course, in his uniform, but I knew him, but that's about it. But he called and asked me out. And so we dated a couple of times while he was home on furlough, and then he went back in the Army. And of course, he had to go back for the rest of that year. And we wrote letters back and forth. There was no anything else except friends. Then the Korean War started. And this was after we'd been dating probably for a year, exclusively. We were not engaged or anything, but the Korean War started. And he thought that he was going to have to go in. In fact, he was called in, but then it was a mistake because he was supposed to be called in with his whole unit. They had weekly meetings, and then 2 weeks every summer they'd go for training. This was being in the reserves, they called it. And they were going to call up his whole unit and go to Korea. So then we decided that we would get married, because then if he had to go away, I could go with him. And so we got engaged at Christmas and got married in February, but he never had to go. But that was all right. We had no money. He owed his dad $500 for a car he'd bought, and we both had jobs. I had 2 years of college by then and did not go on to college after that. And we stayed married for 63 years.
Wow. What advice would you give to other people for a strong and lasting marriage?
Well, love is important, but love changes. But love has to last, for one thing. And you have to love even if it's hard, or if they let you down, or if you have arguments, or they do things you don't like, or even annoying things. You think you see an annoying thing right now. Well, you're going to see it a lot more when you're married. And you aren't going to change them, so you have to either live with it or decide that you can't live with it. But commitment is most important. You have to say, this is for life, and divorce is not an option. Because if you think that, there's lots of times I thought I'd be much happier without him. But you have to be forgiving, you have to be able to forgive and decide that divorce is not an option. Because otherwise it's easy now to get a divorce.
So in all of your dating experience, since you were living it up when you were in college,
that was fun.
What did you learn about dating? What dating advice would you have?
Well, for one date, some of these guys I dated maybe one time, sometimes for a month or a few dates, or never was anything that was serious, but we just had fun. And find out where you're going to go, of course, and what you're going to do. And really, dating is just getting to know people. You don't know them really before you're dating them. If you're casually with groups, you might know them, but something about them. But dating is just to get to know somebody, really. Now I'm old. My husband died 11 years ago. He was blind at the end, but which made it very difficult for him. But we had a 63 years we're married. Now I've been a widow for 11 years. And I like both of my lives. I love being married, and I also love being a widow. Now I do more things that I couldn't do before because I was quite confined with him. He couldn't really stay alone much for very long because he couldn't see anything.
What point would you say that you became a Christian?
For a while there, I always felt jealous or envious because people would talk about this great experience they had. I was saved and all this sort of thing, but I can't remember when I wasn't a Christian. I always knew the Lord, and I always believed. I think that one time it was not so very important to me when I was young and confident and strong, and I thought I could handle it mostly myself. Well, as you get older, you realize that you don't have much control over anything, and so that then you need to depend on the Lord more. And so I become closer to the Lord as I got older, when you really realize that it's His plan, and His plan that's important, and try to find it in the beginning, and your life will be a lot better rather than try to go it on your own.
You've experienced a lot of different stages of life: childhood, married, parenting, being a widow. How have you stayed close to God throughout those different stages of life?
Well, it's important to be involved in the church because it's hard to be a Christian by yourself. I've gone to dozens of Bible studies, which helps a lot. I always have devotions every day. It's important to have Him in your life and not try to do it on your own. I can hardly make that strong enough that you have to depend on the Lord, because without Him you don't even have breath every day.
Is there a scripture or biblical truth that has brought you the most peace or kind of shaped your life?
When people ask me what's my favorite verse, I always say Joshua 1 verse 9, which says, I command you to be strong and courageous, because the Lord your God goes with you wherever you go. And Psalm 139 also was my very favorite psalm. I remember when we were young marrieds and we flew a lot. We went down, visited Caribbean islands often, and so we had to fly. And I never liked to fly. I wasn't afraid to fly, but I didn't like it. So I always could remember that part in the Psalm 139 where it says, if you have to take the wings of the morning, I'm there with you also.
Yeah, who knew that verse would apply to airplanes
Yeah.
later in the future? Do you have a favorite memory or story that you like to tell from any point in your life?
The war years, those are not always good memories, but I remember how patriotic everybody. I was 14 years old when the war ended.
It's World War II.
Yeah, and I remember how patriotic everybody was. It was, everybody was for the war, and all the car plants were transferred into making tanks and planes. You couldn't get a new car. There was no new cars being made, and we used to save our allowances and buy war stamps, and you'd put them in a book, and when we got to 1875, I think, and then $18.75, then you could turn that book in for a war bond. We were lending money to the government, really, for the war effort. And then you got it in 5 years, it matured to $25. And we used to save tinfoil in big rolls because they needed that. And you couldn't buy nylons. There were no nylons. They needed that for the parachutes. And everything was rationed. Meat, shoes, gas, sugar, butter were almost impossible to get. You have to get oil, but they wouldn't let them make it yellow, so they put a little bead of yellow in there, and you had to squeeze it in this bag to make it yellow, so that it would look, you were putting the oil on your margarine, on your bread. White was not good, so we made it yellow with this little bead of yellow dye in there that made it yellow. I was born during the Depression, and but we didn't suffer from that either because my dad always had a job. His dad had a store. Eventually, my dad expanded it, and he had 5 or 6 of them.
Like a grocery store?
Yeah, it's like Hanson size.
Okay.
And eventually he sold them because there was Thrifty Acres was coming in, and Plums was getting bigger, and he either said, well, we either got to get bigger or sell. And so he did sell to Everhard's, which was a good thing, really, because my husband and my brother both worked in the stores, but they were not interested in getting big to compete with Thrifty Acres. So, but anyway, so we never suffered. We always had plenty to eat in the Depression, and we had plenty of food, even the ration things, because we owned a grocery store, so we didn't suffer from any lack of anything. But I know help was hard to get because all the servicemen were in the Army. And so at the time, my dad had hired a woman truck driver, which was an unheard of thing in those days. Mostly women didn't work, and then to have a woman truck driver was an amazing thing. And my mother even worked on Saturdays. She'd help, because otherwise she never worked in the stores. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. But during the war, and we kids would go and help stock shelves on Friday nights. And because it was so hard to get people to work because they were all in service.
Yeah, what was the store called?
Hasper's.
Hasper's. Oh, that makes sense.
That was our name.
Yeah, I feel like there's some people that are scared about, the possibility of World War III or whatever. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom on that?
It'll be different. It'll be completely different. There won't be fighting in trenches, and how they suffered in those cold, wet places. Those guys that were fighting from hill to hill to hill to another hill, and people were mowing them down with machine guns. And when they landed on D-Day in France, how many thousands of people got killed. It was amazing how many people got killed. Well, their wars won't be like that so much anymore. They'll mostly be bombings, and there will be like the SEALs will go in and that sort of thing. Like the war in Iraq was more modern warfare too. That didn't last very long.
What is something you miss from the past, or you think that has been lost over time?
Morality. It's such a different world than when I grew up. The morals of this world are just awful. I mean, Hollywood was always brought up to be an immoral place, and don't watch movies because most of them are bad. But I remember when I was younger, I don't know, Ingrid Bergman was older than I was, but anyway, they were both married, and they had an affair she had an affair with her director. And they had a baby, and so they both got divorces, but she was blackballed in Hollywood for that. Now, would you ever see that today? I mean, they would celebrate having babies without being married, and the divorce rate is just sky high. So it was many, many years before they let her back to make movies in Hollywood because of that one situation. Well, that's kind of morals that I grew up with. Another one is language. Oh, the language, even in books and on TV, the language is awful. I remember one time we were in a hockey game, and a young man behind us said, "That sucks." Well, he got kicked out of the arena for saying that.
What?
Nobody would consider that even a bad word anymore. All the other four-letter words that you never heard of, at least in my circles. I mean, I'm sure there still was some, and it never was in a movie, of course. That sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that I miss, that there isn't anymore that there used to be. It's such a different world than when I grew up.
What's the funniest thing that you've been a part of? Like something that you think back on and you just laugh.
Well, I can think of something. Well, at the time it wasn't so funny, but and we look back at it, it was. We lived in I told you when this neighborhood was small, 3-bedroom houses. There were 12, and all the kids were young there. That was right after we moved there when Greg was born, and we lived there for almost 10 years. And but Dan was less than 5, probably maybe 3 or 4. But we let the kids play outdoors all day, and they come in for lunch and we just call and the kids would come in. But we didn't worry about them. There were lots of neighbors who watched them too, and they didn't really stray out of the neighborhood much because that's where all the kids were. But one day, a policeman came to my door, and he had Dan and his 2 little buddies with him in his car. And he said, somebody called and told us there were 3 little boys walking down the railroad track, which was about a block away from our house. They were walking down the middle of the railroad track, these 3 little boys all together. And as we look back at it, it's funny, but I mean, there was maybe a train running that track once a day or something like that. So they weren't really in any danger yet, but they could have been. And so it's funny thinking back about that was a funny thing, but it wasn't funny at the time.
Yeah. Oh no. All right, well, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for being interested in asking me.